Let's start off by defining this term, anisogamy.
Yeah, I mean, like all these terms, it's rather tedious. It just simply means having two different sizes of gametes in the same species. In animals, of course, that would be sperm and egg.
This week on Science for the People, we are discussing how the sperm and the egg came to be, and how a difference of reproductive interests has led to sexual conflict in bedbugs. I'm Anika Hazra. With me is Dr. Geoff Parker, former professor of zoology at the University of Liverpool, an evolutionary biologist credited with developing a theory to explain the evolution of two sexes. And he continues to conduct research in evolutionary biology.
So, very simple thing, just two different gamete sizes, really. But it is important because it leads to two sexes, males and females. Males produce sperm, females produce eggs.
So has anisogamy always existed, but two different types of gametes?
Well, I think not, actually. I think it's likely, to have evolved in eukaryote organisms from isogamy, another miserable term. That simply means just one gamete size in a species. So in isogamous organisms, they just have one gamete size, sometimes with a range around that size, of course. And so they sort of have one sex, if you like.
So what kind of organisms or species had isogamy?
Most unicellular organisms, I think, have isogamy. A few multicellular organisms have it, but I think it's true to say that all metazoa, that's multicellular animals, and all land plants, for instance, have anisogamy. Very big difference between the large and the small gamete sizes. I think most unicellular forms have isogamy. Some have anisogamy, but most have isogamy.
So by unicellular, do you mean like bacteria?
No, I mean, I'm talking about eukaryotes. That is not bacteria. So we're talking about eukaryote organisms, yeah. So, unicellular plants, unicellular animals, and so on.
Okay. So how did the evolution go from, one single type of gamete to two, and then two sexes?
Well, that's a very interesting question. I think it's a very important one, really. And I think it's likely then that the original eukaryotes would have been unicellular with isogamy. It seems as if anisogamy is linked to the evolution of multicellularity, but not perfectly so. And there are probably good theoretical reasons for this, actually. Won't go into those because they get rather boring. But you would expect anisogamy to evolve as multicellularity evolves. But I think that ancestral gametes are likely to have been small and motile, rather similar to the unicellular organisms that actually produce them. So probably more like sperm, if you like, than ova.
So then how do the isogamists, how do they reproduce?
Fuse in pairs. The gametes fuse in pairs, just as with anisogamous species. Sometimes there are plus and minus mating types. In fact, commonly there are two mating types, often called plus and a minus, which selectively fuse together and won't fuse between each other. So you don't get two pluses or two minuses fusing, only plus and minus forms.
So why is there a need of multiple mating types, at least two of them?
That's a very interesting question. Some people have tried to answer that. Sometimes there are more than two mating types, but usually there are two. I mean, in a very few cases, there are many, many mating types. So we get fusions between most gametes that meet.
All right, so let's get into some of the models that have been developed to explain why these different size gametes have evolved in sexually reproductive organisms. One of them is gamete limitation. So can you explain this model?
Gamete limitation is a rather tedious term. It simply means inefficient fertilization, so that a lot of gametes just fail to fuse. And Kalmus, I think it was long ago, in 1932, did a model where he showed quite clearly that you get more fusions, most fusions, if a population produces some gametes of the size you need for survival, and others as small as possible. So some of the population produce very, very tiny and hence hugely numerous gametes, and others produce some of the gametes of the size needed for survival. That way you get more total surviving zygotes than if you divide everything up equally. But of course, that was a population level argument, actually. It wasn't really based on selection on individuals, if you see what I mean.
So by zygote, you mean a fertilized egg, the fusion of the sperm and the egg?
Yeah, that's right. Yeah. You can actually get a gamete limitation model to work in terms of individual selection. And Jussi Leitonen and Hanna Koko, I think a few years ago, managed to show this. If you imagine, say, that meetings between gametes are very rare. So you imagine that a plus and a minus mating type meet up in just a pair. So there's no real competition between a plus mating types and minus mating types, because they're largely, when they meet up in pairs, they may as well collaborate then to get the most possible fusions, because there's no competition between plus or minus mating types. But it really does only work well if there's almost no competition between the plus mating types and minus mating types for fusions.
What do you mean by competition?
Well, it would be the case where there will be no competition if, say, you imagine groups of organisms, say 20 organisms, so you've got say, for want of better argument, 10 plus mating types and 10 minus mating types, then there would, of course, be competition for fertilizations between the pluses and the minuses. But if you end up with just a pair, one plus and one minus, there's no competition between pluses because there's no other pluses there.
Oh, okay.
Right.
All right, that makes sense. All right, and then another model, one that you actually helped develop, I guess makes more sense in the context of natural selection, again, at the individual level, is called gamete competition. So can you explain this model?
Yeah, it's a long time ago now. I was quite young then. It was 1972 with Robin Baker and Vic Smith. We really did some computer simulations. We had a computer simulation in which we had an ancestral population of individuals that really released their gametes by broadcast spawning. So imagine an aqueous medium, broadcast spawning. The gametes were released and they fused randomly. All the individuals we assumed had the same reproductive resources. So each parent, if you like, could produce a few large or many small gametes. There could be a range of gamete size depending on how many gametes were produced. And the only other thing that we assumed was that zygote survival, or the fitness, if you like, of the zygote increases with its size, which seems likely, I think, really. If you imagine very tiny zygotes would be very inviable, and the more provisioning they've got, then the more viable, the fitter they become. Okay? So that was really quite exciting because it gave just two solutions: isogamy or anisogamy, that is one sex or two sexes. It never resulted in 3, 4, 10 or 13 sexes, which is rather nice. And which one you get depends on the nature of the relation between zygote size, which is the sum of the two, the two fusing gametes, and survival of the zygote. So really the critical thing in which you get one sex or two sexes is really that relation between a zygote size and its survivorship.
Does the egg become bigger to compensate for the smaller size of the sperm, or does it...
Yes.
Okay.
Yes, it does really. it's a sort of game between the two, if you like. If I think actually isogamy tends to produce zygotes that are actually slightly smaller than very pronounced anisogamy. So it's rather interesting that when two collaborate, it does tend to result in a zygote that's slightly less well provisioned than when only one provides, which is an interesting thing.
Can a male gamete essentially parasitize the female gamete by taking advantage of the female's larger investment?
Well, in the 1972 paper, we did use that analogy because as anisogamy becomes very extreme, you got these minuscule sperm and quite big ova. I mean, vastly bigger, orders of magnitude bigger than the sperm. I mean, if you consider the bird's egg, for instance, that's hugely different in size. And so you could see, if you like, males parasitizing females in that sense, yes. Perhaps that wasn't a very nice metaphor. No, I think it's not an unreasonable metaphor because it is really the case where one sex is actually providing all the resources for the zygote and the other is only grabbing a genetic contribution to it, if you like.
So if this is the case, why hasn't the female evolved a counter strategy?
Right.
Or maybe they produce eggs that are smaller that kind of force the sperm to become bigger to compensate for that difference.
Yeah, that's a very good question. And it's something that really bothered me after the initial model, actually. I mean, our original model really assumed random fusions of gametes. I did some subsequent models looking at what would happen if we had an ovum producer or a proto-female, if you like, that produced ova that would only fuse with other ova. So they refused to fuse with sperm, if you see what I mean. It was a way of rebelling against this tyranny that was being imposed on them, to use a very weird metaphor, perhaps. But if anisogamy is weak, so there's little difference in size between the male and female gametes, such a mutant may well spread, actually, and return the system to isogamy, okay? Now, if that happens sometime later, a new sperm drive is likely to arise in this new population, so which would then begin again to replace this newly derived isogamy. So, you get a new sperm drive arising. And if one of these sperm drives is such that anisogamy becomes very, very pronounced, okay, before a new counteracting mutant ovum arises, it's likely to force any such mutant to fuse with ova from the same parent, other mutant ova. Because what happens is all the randomly fusing ova become fused with all these numerous sperm, all these thousands and thousands of sperm per single ova in the system. The ratio of sperm to ova is so high that all the randomly fusing ova are grabbed quickly by all these sperm in the first few moments of fertilization, if there's synchronous spawning. And so all that's left is the selectively fusing ova, these mutants that refuse to mate with or fuse with sperm. And so, of course, if there are disadvantages in, as it were, selfing, then they would have a disadvantage. Also, there is another consideration that if you imagine that there's very strong anisogamy already evolved, then probably the ovum has then evolved to be the optimal size for the zygote survival. And so adding another ovum of equal size to it may not increase its fitness all that much. Okay?
So you can't have a super zygote?
A super zygote, it may be a bit more fit, but it may be, maybe towards the asymptote of benefits of size. So there probably isn't such a great benefit in being a selectively fusing zygote ovum, and if it happens very late on, and of course if if the ova have become non-motile, it's going to be very difficult to fuse with other ova, isn't it? So that, I think there are good reasons why it is a stable system, really.
What about differences in parental care of offspring after they're born? Does the fact that females invest more in the offspring to begin with have something to do with females maybe investing more in keeping their offspring alive after they're born?
I think one thing we've got to remember is that parental care after zygotes are released is, well, at least overall in the animal kingdom, is less common than no care. I mean, care is very common in, of course, birds and mammals and many vertebrates, but many invertebrates and, in fact, many taxa of vertebrates have no parental care at all. When parental care is favoured, I think which sex actually cares may actually depend largely on circumstances. I mean, I think it was Dawkins and Carlyle long ago pointed out that if you look at fish, I think in fish, male and females, male or female care is quite common. And I think they're both, I don't know if they're equally common, but they're both common. And of course, if you think about it, both sexes are present when the zygotes are actually produced, because there's this tends to happen in pair spawning fish. So a male's present and a female's present, and so which one, if care is going to be favoured, which one stays and cares? It's almost like perhaps tossing a coin. If you think of mammals, it's very, very unusual for males to care in mammals. And of course, only females are present at the time the offspring is born. So males have usually gone away and aren't around. So, you know, it's not surprising that in mammals, it's rather unusual to get male care. So I think when parental care does occur, it's a matter of a secondary issue from the general sexual cascade logic, if you like. It's an aside from that, and it rather depends on special ecological conditions favouring care and the circumstances under which they occur then.
So speaking of mammals, I think it would be very easy to attempt to assert gender roles in human society using the science of anisogamy. In fact, the fields of sociobiology and evolutionary psychology attempt to do that. But can societal differences in women and men be explained by the evolution of different size gametes?
Well, yeah, I think there's great dangers in being too facile about that. I mean, and I'll tell you why. I mean, for instance, Darwin claimed, and it didn't endear him to people in the present day and age, I think, claimed that men had evolved much higher abilities than women because of sexual selection. You know, there were two very obvious flaws in his argument. Firstly, his argument was backed up by comparing the number of men and women versus women achievers at that time. Now, we were talking about Victorian England, I think, and it didn't seem to occur to him that opportunity was a huge determinant of whether you achieve things. I mean, you know, women simply didn't get the opportunity to become musicians, artists, writers, and so on. And when they did become novelists, they tended to write under men's pen names. So I think that was the most obvious flaw. The second flaw, of course, was that he didn't know any genetics. I mean, if you imagine, say, a gene for increased intelligence, even if sexual selection in men was favouring that, the most likely place it would arise would be on the autosomes, which both sexes share. And you'd need very strong selection against it in women to get it sex limited to men. I can't see any reason why intelligence would be selected against in women and favoured in men. And of course, if it arose on the X chromosome, well, don't forget that females have two X's rather than one, so they'd probably end up being more intelligent and less, anyway, you see the argument why it can be very dangerous to make claims without too much knowledge. I think if I was pushed, I'd probably think one can certainly justifiably claim that physical differences between the sexes largely relate to past sexual selection, and hence, of course, anisogamy. Behavioural ones are harder. So much of our behaviour relates to culture and learning, but it would be surprising if there were no behavioural differences between the sexes in sexual behaviour. I think that, at least, that stem from our evolutionary past. I'm not sure it extends to much more than sexual behaviour, but I'd be surprised if there were no differences between the sexes in that aspect. But even so, I'd be very much against any attempt to use this to discriminate between the sexes in terms of, say, legislation or opportunities pay or anything else for that matter.
And the physical differences between females and males, that's not just something we see in Homo sapiens and humans. That's something we see across the animal kingdom.
Yes, that's right. I think it's very interesting that when male-male competition is strong, males tend to be bigger than females. Females tend to be bigger than males when male-male competition is weak, because bigger females often produce more babies. So being larger is often favoured in females, up to some optimum, obviously, because bigger females produce more eggs or babies. But if there's no male-male competition in males, sometimes you get very, very tiny males. There's a huge difference in certain fish where, I think anglerfish, where the male attaches to the female and it's a tiny little dwarf thing, whereas the female's huge relative to the male side. And so there's many orders of magnitude difference in male-female size there. But if you look at the opposite extreme, I think the biggest difference in size is in species where you've got huge male-male competition, like elephant seals, where there's probably a 5 or 6-fold difference, I don't know, or maybe even more. I think there's a fish which has much male-male competition. I think it's a cichlid fish where there's a very, very high male size compared to female size, but that is where the females are constrained to lay their eggs in mollusk shells, and so the female size is kept smaller because of the need to be able to enter the mollusk shells that are available. But yeah, I think physical differences, particularly size and so on, do relate, when males are larger, certainly relate to past sexual selection. I don't think there's much doubt about that.
Do you think that a lack of opportunity for females continues to be a major challenge for human society today?
Yes, I do, actually. It's probably better in Canada and the States, I'm not sure, but in Britain, I still think women have a difficult time in science. And that's a great loss to science, really, because there are many very talented women who don't get the same opportunities that men do. Partly, I think it's not always the fault of the institutions. If it is the fault of selection committees, that would be inexcusable. I think sometimes it's a result of the biological fact that women have children and men don't. And I think every opportunity should be explored for enabling women to return to science after they've had children, to not lose because they've had children, and so on. It's a great problem, and one I think that still needs addressing. And it's still true in Britain too that women don't achieve equal pay with men, and I think that is shameful, quite frankly. I have a wife and daughters, and so I think they should have exactly the same opportunities that any sons should have.
That was Geoff Parker, evolutionary biologist and former professor of zoology at the University of Liverpool. Up next, we have Roberto Pereira, a research scientist in urban entomology at the University of Florida.
Science for the People is a weekly radio show and podcast that explores everyday life from a scientific perspective. We are a member of the Skepchick Network, a collection of blogs, podcasts, and video content focusing on science and critical thinking. To find out where Science for the People airs near you, or to listen to past episodes, check out our website at scienceforthepeople.ca. You'll also find links to support us at Patreon, to connect with us on Facebook and Twitter, and to subscribe to the podcast in iTunes. And now, back to the show.
Welcome back to Science for the People. With me now is Dr. Roberto Pereira, research scientist in urban entomology at the University of Florida. Roberto, welcome to Science for the People.
Thank you.
All right, so you are an urban entomologist who studies urban pests such as ants, cockroaches, and bedbugs. So bedbugs are a pretty famous example of sexual conflict at its worst. But before we get into this example, can you explain for our audience what sexual conflict is?
Well, sexual conflict is basically a situation where what is good for one of the sexes is not necessarily good for the other sex of the same species. So there's a little conflict there that, in the case of the bedbugs, the males want to reproduce and the females want to reproduce, but they don't want to be hurt. And that's where the conflict comes in.
So how do bedbugs reproduce?
Well, they have what is called the traumatic insemination. And what that means is that there is really no sexual opening in the female that the male would use to deposit the sperm. So the sperm from the male is actually injected into the abdomen of the female. So there has to be a puncture that is done by the male into the abdomen of the female in order to deposit the sperm inside that body.
So the female has no natural opening?
No, not for the sexual coupling with the male. So that's a strange situation in bedbugs and other associated species. But I guess it works for them. But they have been around for quite some time. So I actually, the idea or the expression traumatic insemination seems to be a lot more harsh than it actually is. And this is a system that has evolved into these species. And there is actually, in the case of the bedbugs, there is a organ right at the point where the males will actually penetrate the female to absorb that sperm. And there is in that system also some protection so that the bacteria that may be associated with that penetration do not kill the female.
Wow, this is really interesting. I didn't know that there was no actual natural or non-traumatic means of reproduction in bedbugs. Has this always been the case throughout the evolutionary history of bedbugs, or do you think that maybe this traumatic insemination, it might be more efficient, so it has evolved over time?
Well, the fact that it is around now, it probably is an indication that there is some advantage for that species or for that group of species to have evolved this type of insemination. It's hard for us to see what is exactly that advantage of this process in relation to just having a natural opening that is proper for the insemination of the female. But it's something that works and has been working for millions of years. So we can't argue with nature, I guess.
So let's talk about where the conflict comes in. So the sexual conflict. What are the different reproductive goals of the male bedbug versus the female bedbug?
Well, the main goal is probably the same, right? They want to reproduce and mean that population is a viable population. The female wants to probably maximize her offsprings, just like the males want to maximize their offsprings. The problem is that when you have this traumatic insemination, there is a cost in terms of fitness for the female. And if the female gets to be inseminated too many times, that increases the chances of contamination, infection with bacteria, and this kind of thing. And so the lifespan of the female is limited if she gets too many inseminations, and is the problem right there, the conflict. For the male, there's no harm that is done to the male. So the male, they want to copulate as many times as possible, because that maximizes their chance of having their offspring being produced by a female, especially because the female bedbug has what's called the less male supremacy, or meaning that the last male to inseminate that female is the one that will end up with the sperm fertilizing the eggs, and that is the one that's going to be the father of that progeny, at least in that one cycle.
Okay, so all the males are trying to be the last male to inseminate a female before she is fertilized and gives birth.
Yeah. So you see that the female may want to limit it, how many times that she gets inseminated, because that means being stabbed in the abdomen, and that increases her chance of not surviving as long. And the males on their side, they're trying to make sure that they are the last one to inseminate. So the female actually has some postures that can limit the males in their approach to her. So that's a behavior that was probably developed just to limit the number of inseminations that are occurring within that group. So.
Well, what about the contamination you spoke about? Where does that come from? Are the male's reproductive organs not clean?
Well, it's just from the environment, and the fact that they are in an environment that is not extremely clean. If you have seen an infestation of bed bugs in an apartment, you will see that there's a lot of the feces, the blood that's passed out as feces afterwards, because they are feeding on human blood or other animal blood, and there's cast skins and other detritus in that environment. Therefore, there will be a lot of bacteria. Bed bugs have been shown to be carrying different bacteria on their body. So it's just environmental contamination that will come into the body of the female, because that cuticle that would protect the internal organs is broken when there is insemination with the males.
So there are two risks to females with traumatic insemination. The first is injury, obviously, and then having to heal that injury afterwards, and that obviously takes a toll on the bedbug's health, the female's health. And then there's also the risk of infection from contamination.
Yeah, and the cost of healing that wound is probably not that much if it's once or twice and not too often, because that's what's normal for the bed bug. But if it gets to be too much, then it gets to be a little bit more costly, because it will take reserves that the female could have been using for some other factors or other operation that is needed there. So including reproduction, including producing number of eggs and high number of eggs and other things.
What is the lifespan of a bed bug?
This is a question that's is interesting, because the bed bug, it takes about a month for a bed bug to go from egg to adult. And then the adult can live for several months, maybe even years. If they are quiet in a corner and they are not feeding too much, they can actually survive for months. And people have seen and mentioned years without feeding in a corner where they are quiet and they are not spending their energy or anything, and they're not desiccating and so on and so forth. So that's the extreme cases. But normally, the female will go through a few egg cycles and eventually will die. So it will be a few months rather than years. But it can be extended in some extreme cases, both for the males and the females, and actually nymphs, that if you just leave them in a corner and they're not being disturbed, but they don't have any extra food, they can be in a quiescent stage for a very long time.
The nymphs are the juvenile stage of the bedbugs, right?
Exactly.
Okay. How often do female bedbugs reproduce within their lifetime?
It all depends on the availability of males and things, but every 2 weeks or so, she is basically ready for another batch of eggs. So it all depends on the availability. I actually don't have any numbers. Remember any numbers of average number of copulations and egg cycles. But usually you can think about maybe 6, 7, 8, and then the bedbug will be, because the bedbug can produce usually up to 200 eggs. Female bedbug will produce, and usually a batch of eggs will be 11, 12, maybe a little bit more. So in order to spend all those 200 that she theoretically has available, it will be a few cycles, maybe 8, 9, 10 cycles.
So a female might have to go through this traumatic insemination process 6, 7, maybe 8 times in their adulthood.
Yes. And sometimes, for each cycle, she may be actually going through more than one insemination if she is not able to protect herself from the males attacking her. So.
Okay, so how do females defend themselves from the males if they don't want to mate with them?
Well, there are some just behavioral things that may occur. One of the things that they do is that they have a certain posture that they curve their body, and basically that prevents the male from reaching that point where they penetrate her body. That point in her body actually has a little curvature in the cuticle, and so there is an exact point where the male is actually penetrating the abdomen of the female. So by just curving her body, she can prevent the males from actually copulating with her. But the other thing that happens is she can actually move away, and that's what we did in the experiment that you were looking at initially. And what they do is that females will tend to move away from concentrations of males. So bedbugs live in ambient, and they usually have these clusters of bedbugs. And these clusters include a bunch of nymphs, maybe a few eggs there in the environment too, and males and females normally. But what we observed in this experiment that was done by one of our grad students a number of years ago, Marjorie Pfister, was that the females will have a tendency to move away from concentrations, from aggregations where there were too many males. And they would have a tendency to form aggregations that had a majority of females. Okay. And this is a way that they protect themselves from being attacked by the males they're looking to copulate.
If they're in a cluster of females, do the females protect and defend each other, or is it just a numbers game where if you are one among many females, you're less likely to be followed or inseminated by a male?
Yeah, I think it is just a numbers game, that if you are in a group that has more males than females, the chances of a female being attacked by more than one male is greater. If you're in a aggregation where you have a few males for many females, the chances of any female being attacked more than once is decreased. So that's just a numbers game that is played there. So what we observed was that females would have a tendency to leave aggregations that have a high number of males and go to aggregations that have a lower number of males.
Are these clusters, is the purpose of the cluster just to have the opportunity to mate with another bedbug if needed? Is that the reason why they have these clusters that are close together?
Not really. There is a certain protection in terms of these clusters have a higher moisture level in the air, so they form a microenvironment that it's a little bit more protective for these bed bugs. There's possibly some aspects of prevention of attack by natural enemies, although I don't think people have really looked into that. We don't really know about too many insects that are predators or parasites of these bed bugs. So it's more that they like to be in these aggregations. We think because of the controlling the moisture around themselves.
And is there also a purpose, say, to raise the nymphs, the young, within these clusters and protect them as well?
Yeah, to a certain extent, protecting from other natural enemies. Is a way that this would also work. Although the nymphs can move from one cluster to another, and we don't really see that. And although people I haven't really looked at parental care, so the nymphs are not really attached to their parents in any way. They are usually attached to where there's a cluster of eggs. That's where they will start a concentration once they eclode from those eggs, and then. But bed bugs are not staying in the same groups all the time. They are moving from one group to another, and as nymphs, that's probably the case too. Although I don't know that anybody has really done the experiment of marking nymphs and knowing exactly where they end up. That has been done with adults, and they see that they don't stay in the same cluster. They don't stay with the same group. They kind of move around and regroup themselves.
So are the defensive and evasive behaviors that females demonstrate, are they actually helpful in keeping the female bed bugs alive?
Yes, and I really don't have numbers that I recall at this point in time, but there has been experiments done that show that females that had higher number of copulations, they had shorter lifespans. So it is established that by protecting themselves from mating too many times, the females can live longer and therefore reproduce for a long period of time.
Let's say you have a female bedbug and a male bedbug, and they want to reproduce with each other at the same time. How would that work?
Mm-hmm. It's a simple process. The female, the males are always very industrious in trying to find ways to get to the females. But if the female is receptive, the male basically curves its body onto the body of the female, so the male can reach the underside of the female with his male organ and penetrate in that certain area in the abdomen. And so it's nothing elaborate, and it all depends on the female being more receptive. And if she is a fairly simple process there, and the female gets inseminated. They separate. The female will go one way. The male will go another way, and that's it. And they don't maintain that pair for a long period.
Do the females ever have to seek out the males? Or are they just males are just around all the time?
I don't think they have to, because the males do a lot of the seeking and they are insistent. what we observe is that the females have a tendency to try to avoid too many matings and not necessarily look for a mating because that comes to them.
Are the female bedbugs, are they choosy, or do they have like a preference for the type of male they mate with?
I haven't seen any information on that, any studies that would indicate choice of the female. Of course, the female has an opportunity to try to minimize or to try to prevent a certain male from mating with her, but we don't know for sure if the females are looking for anything in particular in terms of size or something else. I haven't seen any studies on that yet.
Okay, I was trying to get at courtship, and I wanted to ask if there is any courtship involved in bedbug mating. You have the colorful, the colors in tropical fishes, courtship dancing in birds. Is there anything like that at all in bedbugs?
No, not much of a courtship. There doesn't seem to be any particular behavior that is associated before the thing. It almost looks like an attack. Okay. And the female may be receptive, especially if the female is blood fed, so she is much bigger and she is not able to curve her body and this kind of thing. Then the mating will occur more easily. But if female is a little bit more agile and she decided by some reason that is not the best time for the mating or not the best male for the mating, she can try to do the curvature of the body or run away and this kind of thing to avoid that mating.
So these competing reproductive strategies, you have the male whose reproductive organ has evolved to become more and more intense, and then the female has evolved behaviors or maybe her own internal structures in response to the male's. But these strategies, don't they come at a cost to the male and the female?
Yeah, especially for the female, there is a cost in just having too many reproductions, and that's where she tries to limit that. For the male, I guess if there is more effort into finding the mates and more effort in actually accomplish the copulation, that's energy that's spent that may limit the lifespan of the bedbug at some point in time.
Right. So in the female's case, her strategy is aligned with her survival, but for the males, that's not the case. So how costly is it for a male bedbug to develop and evolve this appendage that they use for traumatic insemination?
Well, it's that part I really don't know that I understand exactly why this thing evolved, because it seems to me there is a perfect system that has been working for many other insects and many other species all over the world, that it's having the male organ penetrating the female in her reproductive system, and therefore to me it's really not clear that this is necessarily a very advantageous system that exists. So I really couldn't reply, couldn't answer to the question, why would this develop? I guess once you have a system where there is penetration of the female body that causes a wound, as in the case of the bedbugs, there is some advantage in growing some organs to absorb that sperm that is injected, and some organ that prevents higher infection rates from getting established in that female. Why exactly they had to develop this traumatic insemination system is not very clear to me.
Could there be a reason why reproduction is prioritized, at least over survival or maybe development for the male bedbugs?
Yeah, that's possible, but I don't see that the traumatic insemination really is that much better in preserving the life of the male in relation to a normal or a male organ, female organ copulation that would occur. It's really not very clear to me that there is that much an advantage for the male in that way, except that it may be that the less male supremacy or is easier established that way than with the copulation through the natural organs that would occur. So I'm not really sure what is the advantage for the male or for the female to develop this system. And it's a system that you don't really see in too many insects. So it's a little strange that this actually even developed at some point in time. It's not clear to me. I guess we would probably have to understand a little bit better the lifestyle and the situations that these primitive species would have that would make such a system more advantageous in that situation.
I think it would be helpful for our audience if they understood what the male reproductive organ looks like and how exactly it can puncture the body of the female. Do you have an idea? Could you describe very briefly what that organ looks like?
Yeah, it's basically a curved arrowhead, so to speak. So it's a hard, cuticle curved point. So it's very much like it would be a knife or something like this, and it's just, and actually the part of the female that's receiving that organ has a little indentation in the cuticle and between two segments of the bedbug, which guides that organ to a point to penetrate the body of the female, and under that cuticle there's the spermolage that receives the sperm, which is an organ that the female has there. So it's really just like a blade, a curved blade or a curved cone that gets inserted into the female.
So has this organ, has it evolved to become more intense, monstrous looking over time, or is this not the case for bed bugs? Is there like the evolutionary arms race, so to speak?
Yeah, I can't talk about the evolution of this organ. I just don't have the information on that, on how it was and how it is now in the bedbug species. But it actually, in terms of the organ itself, it has to be much less elaborate because all this is like curved curved long cone that penetrates the organ. It penetrates the cuticle. So I guess in a way there is an advantage because it eliminates having to have a perfect coupling of female and male organ that and perhaps it's easier for the male to find a mate without having to have a very elaborate coupling that has to occur.
Do you think that maybe this reproductive system has something to do with how persistent they are?
I actually don't know that it is this type of insemination that is allowing them to thrive. I think there are many other factors that make them a good urban pest because they are, they're able to hide during the day, attack the host during the night. The hosts, their bite on humans are not necessarily things that people feel right away. So the humans are basically in a state of not being able to combat that attack. So I think the bed bugs have a very good system on their life, and then the way that they have evolved, and the fact that they were able to bed bug infestations were very common up to the 1940s or so, and then with use of DDT and not many other products, those infestations declined quite a bit. But at that time that we stopped using DDT, bedbug populations were already resistant to those types of products. And now we have the populations now are resistant to the pyrethroids that we have been using to control them. So the bed bugs have been able to adapt to different situations through the years and have adapted to the homes that we live in. They have adapted to having air conditioning in these homes and not being in caves that don't have controlled temperature. So they have many other mechanisms that allow them to adapt and to be efficient pests and continue to reproduce in forming larvae. So I'm not sure that the insemination system is necessarily what is making them a pest, or if it would make them less of a pest if they had a different reproduction system.
I think the key here is that they're very good at adapting. So from what I understand, traumatic insemination, maybe it's not necessarily so much sexual conflict. It's just how things are. This is just how male and female bedbugs reproduce. And it's been working for them.
Yeah, and I even question when we say traumatic insemination, because that's a very homocentric evaluation of what is going on there. And with reproduction of with other insects that don't have what is called the traumatic insemination, you also see females trying to limit the number of copulations that they have, just because they know that may not be very, it's not that they know, but it's established that having too many inseminations may not be the most effective use of their time, may not be the best thing for their body to recuperate from, and so on and so forth. So the fact that bedbugs have this so-called traumatic insemination is not much different from the insemination of many other insects, many species all over the world. And for me, it's kind of a curiosity. It's an interesting thing to talk about, but it does not seem to be really causing a tremendous loss of reproductive potential or anything like this in normal situations. But it is possible that in certain situations this type of system may be detrimental. But in what we see in infestations all over the world of bed bugs, it does not seem to limit that infestation at all.
All right, Roberto, thank you so much. If you want to learn more about Geoff Parker or Roberto Pereira, you can check out their links on our website at www.scienceforthepeople.ca. Thanks for listening. We'll see you next week on Science for the People.
Science for the People is produced by Rochelle Saunders and edited by Ryan Bromsgrove. Helen Quivalon is our publishing liaison. We get research help from Josh Witten and consulting support from Desiree Schell. Our frequently seen guest hosts are Marion Kilgour, Anika Hazra, and Jessica Yaros. Our theme song is called Binary Consequence, and it was written and recorded by Fractal Pattern. Science for the People is entirely listener-supported. You can find us on Patreon, where you can support us with monthly donations in any amount, or you can send us a one-time donation in any amount via the donate page of our website. Science for the People is created in partnership with the Skepchick Network, a collection of blogs, podcasts, and video content focusing on the intersection of science, popular culture, politics, and social justice. You can find out more about Skepchick at skepchick.org. The show is hosted by science news writer Bethany Brookshire and me, Rochelle Saunders.